Hey, we are back for Thursday evening's edition of Weather for Weather Geeks. We didn't do a video last evening because, of course, we were covering severe weather on a couple of occasions on Wednesday. You ever have one of those days where you're just kind of wrong-footed the entire day? That seemed to be how Wednesday was. We just never quite were able to catch up on the changing situation across the area, and a couple of these situations that we had yesterday were kind of a surprise. Now, the line that rolled through last evening late, towards 10, 11 o'clock, that was expected. But the supercells that we had out ahead of that main line, that was not expected, and we had, quite a bit of wind damage as a result, I should say, in parts of the area. These are all the storm reports over the last 48 hours. Now, a smattering of wind damage, of course, but you'll notice no confirmed tornadoes. We had quite the vivid structure to some of our storms last evening. True supercells, and we got a lot of pictures and video from many of our local photographers and spotters, thanks to Tyler Berry, of course, for sending this picture. He took this in parts of southern Mahoning County. This was the supercell thunderstorm that originated out over south and east of Cleveland and then rolled through parts of Summit County into Portage County, produced a tornado warning for a time in extreme southwestern Mahoning, out into northeastern Stark, parts of Portage. And then a new warning was issued once it was almost finished with Mahoning County, and once this was heading down towards northeastern Columbiana County, a tornado warning was issued. Now, the radar indicated rotation at times was pretty impressive with this, but thankfully, even though we had a lowering, we had a mesocyclone, we had a wall cloud, we did not see the rotation extend all the way to the ground at any point during the life cycle of that thunderstorm. So just a reminder of, generally speaking, some of the science and meteorology behind how storms rotate, how we get a mesocyclone, which is basically, of course, just a fancy word for a rotating thunderstorm. Well, it's about the wind shear and the instability. First, you need the wind shear. You need a changing of the wind direction and or the wind speed as you go up in height through the atmosphere. That creates kind of a horizontal column or tube of rotation, and then a thunderstorm updraft gets going and tilts that rotation up into the vertical. And so you have now the beginnings of a rotating thunderstorm, which can manifest itself in a wall cloud, and eventually, if that rotation comes down to the ground, we get a tornado. We don't have a whole lot of true mesocyclones or supercell thunderstorms in our part of the country. They're much more common, of course, in the middle of the country, down into the south. We see more of these lines and clusters and things like that, little individual isolated thunderstorms that take on a supercell structure. That's not something we see all that often in our neck of the woods. But we had a couple of those types of storms yesterday, including the most prominent one during the 6 and 7 o'clock hours last evening. Otherwise, the scuttlebutt, certainly online, has been, hey, what's up with all the rain lately? What's up with the downpours? We've had several instances of tropical downpours of late, and, a couple of things going on here. One, it's the season. May, June, and July, that's kind of the 3-month period in which tropical thunderstorms, tropical downpours, they're most likely during that 3-month period. And, this happens every summer. But then you throw in the warming climate. And, when it comes to our part of the world and our part of the United States, I basically think this is the top 4 ways that climate change is manifesting itself. I think the number one way it's showing its cards, if you will, in our part of the world is the increase in precipitation. The increase in the amount of days where routine showers and storms, it's almost like they're on steroids a little bit. They get a little extra kick due to the warmer atmosphere overhead. The warmer atmosphere can hold, if you will, more moisture, and that's more moisture that can be wrung out. The other ways that climate change is most noticeable in our part of the world, since we're not near oceans or anything like that, more humid summers resulting in warmer summer nights, and overall warmer winters, of course, the number 4 way that I think that the changing climate manifests itself locally across the globe. Climate change shows its hand, shows its cards, if you will, in different ways, but specifically in eastern Ohio and western PA, that's kind of what I think of when I think of ways the changing climate is impacting our weather. In terms of our weather tonight, it is a more comfortable night. We may get grazed by, see this little cluster of storms up, getting set to impact Detroit in eastern Michigan right now as of 7:15. This might graze a few spots in northeast Ohio and western PA overnight tonight. Otherwise, yeah, it's more comfortable outside tonight. The dew points have started to drop. The dew point compared to the 7 o'clock hour last evening, when we had those storms around, the dew point is 10 degrees lower. That'll set the stage for, lows in the upper 50s overnight, more comfortable than recent nights. And overall, pretty nice Friday is on the way. Our model here shows a dry morning. Now, as we get into the afternoon, the next couple of days will be characterized by Pretty strong warm advection, warmer air pushing back into the region. And sometimes in these types of setups with the upper level configuration the way it is, you can get some clusters of storms cascading on the northern edge of this advancing warmer air mass. And a couple of these minor kind of clusters may try to graze us again tomorrow afternoon, tomorrow evening. I think it's a low chance. I think the bulk of Friday is dry. But there's a low chance that your community might see a quick shower or storm towards the end of the afternoon, early in the evening. We're going to be watching the radar again as we head into the weekend. Look what happens here. This next cluster looks a little stronger. Now, this is probably going to miss us, but it may be a little bit of a close shave on Saturday. Talked about this on Weather for Weather Geeks a few days ago, how at that point I didn't totally trust the dry weekend forecast expectations because of, I recognized in the pattern that something like this could probably occur. A lot of the modeling was taking these thunderstorm complexes and aiming them exclusively at New England a few days ago. But as you can see, as we're getting closer to the event, there may be some thunderstorms trying to cascade south and eastward close enough to us that we may get grazed by a thunderstorm on Saturday in places like Erie and Buffalo and Jamestown. Probably not around here, but we're going to keep an eye on it. We think the odds favor this missing us to the north and east on Saturday. But that's something that bears watching. At the very least, it may end up being a little bit cloudier locally than we have been bargaining for on Saturday. But after that, then all systems are go for just oppressive weather starting Sunday and taking us into next week. This heat wave really means some business. This isn't just summer. This is above average heat, with the heat to a point where weather-sensitive groups can certainly have a rough time for a few days. Anyone without air conditioning, we're not going to see much relief at night with the humidity as high as it will be. The dew points will be up into the upper 60s, lower 70s. The temperatures at night aren't going to drop below 70 for a few straight nights. So if you don't have air conditioning, you just don't get much relief at night when that occurs. So I think the worst of the heat will be starting Sunday and taking us into Monday, taking us into Tuesday. I think it'll still be pretty hot and humid Wednesday and Thursday, but by that point, the worst of the heat is probably behind us. But Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, just downright miserable if you have to exert yourself outdoors, whether it be working or playing. I think we're going to string together at least 4 90-degree plus days in a row. That's about half of our yearly average. We average 8 days with highs in the 90s per year. We had exactly average last year. We only had 2 back in 2023. By the way, the last time we had a heat wave of 4 days or more, in other words, highs in the 90s, 4 consecutive days or more, that was 5 years ago, back in July of 2020. So beyond midweek, the heat relaxes some, but there's certainly no cool weather coming our way anytime real soon. Instead of the 90s, I think we'll see highs in the 80s during the last handful of days of June. So as expected, June is going to go into the record books as a warmer than average month, in contrast to the cooler than average month we had back in May, when a lot of people were saying it's probably going to be a cool summer because it was cool for a time in May. And I told you back then, that's not often the case. That's not necessarily the case at all. And sure enough, June is turning out to be a pretty warm month, and it's going to be a real scorcher as we head towards Sunday and early next week. We're going to take Friday evening off from Weather for Weather Geeks, but I'll have full updates on our newscasts and on all my social medias as well. And by the way, if you're a podcast listener, we dropped a new episode of the 21 News podcast, and once a month it's a weather-themed podcast, and that podcast dropped this morning. So if you're a podcast listener, wherever you get your podcasts, check that out. Ralph Mack and I kind of discussed how to be a weather geek, weather instrumentation, the best weather stations to buy, how to properly measure snow in the winter, all that kind of things, all those kinds of things, I should say. It's a really cool conversation. These podcasts, these weather podcasts, they only take up about 20 minutes of your time. It's a quick, easy listen. So again, if you're a podcast listener, check that out, I should say, wherever you get your podcasts. The weather-related podcast in the 21 News podcast feed we tend to release it around the middle of the month. So we'll do another one coming up in July. I think we're going to talk about weather photography next month on the Radar podcast, part of the 21 News family of podcasts. In the meantime, thanks for watching on this Thursday night, and have a great rest of your night.